This is a wild type crested gecko, and today we're going to talk about every single crested gecko morph out right now. If you were to go to New Caledonia and walk around in the forest of Isle of Pines, you would see geckos just like this one. They might be significantly skinnier than this guy, but the same coloration. They're usually like a brownish, olivish tone, and they may have some Dalmatian spots here and there. But that is basically what a wild crested gecko looks like, and he is also a phantom. More on that in a couple minutes. Okay, so these next two geckos are the more common types of morphs that you will find. The one here on my right is actually a flame crested gecko, and a flame basically has one base color and usually a lighter colored pattern on the back. Now, the harlequin is basically a higher end version of the flame, which has that base color that you see that is brown there. Aside from just the back pattern, it also has the lateral pattern and the limb pattern. So you see those light, like cream yellow markings? They're not only on her back, they're also on her sides and on her legs. And that is what makes it a harlequin versus this flame that doesn't have any pattern on her legs or her sides. Now, I will say there are various different degrees to the morphs and the base colors of these geckos. On my right hand is Chester. He is a yellow super Dalmatian. And on my left hand is one of his girlfriends, and she is a red super Dalmatian. As you can see, Chester has significantly more spots than the female, but she is still a super Dalmatian. Now, there's also various degrees within each morph. Like Chester has a lot more spots, and he even has a cluster on this side, and the female has some oil spots that Chester doesn't have as much of. Each gecko fires up and fires down, which means they flare up their colors to look very bright and high contrast, or they pale down. The female on my left is fired down, so her best colors are not showing, and Chester on my right is fired up, so you are seeing his best colors right now. So that is just something to take in consideration when thinking about these morphs. You could have basically any of these morphs that I am going to talk to you about in every single shade of base color. So you could have flames and harlequins that are both red or yellow or black base or brown base or olive base, anything in between. Keep in mind that when we're describing the patterns of this and the morphs of these geckos, it's not necessarily a one particular color that applies to the morph. It could be a variety of different colors. This is Chester. He is a super Dalmatian, and you could see on his side right here, this is what we would call a cluster spot. So it's basically a bunch of spots that got together and made a cluster. And he is one of the most beautiful super Dalmatians I have ever seen, let alone owned. So this right here is a yellow tiger, and it is also a phantom. We'll talk about that here in a second. Now, this girl is beautiful. She has very distinct tiger markings, and what the tiger markings are the cuts of pattern that you see across her body there. The tiger markings kind of like break the pattern on vertically, and then we'll talk about pinstriping later that pushes the pattern horizontally. But this is a beautiful example of what a tiger looks like and what it does to the pattern. Now, this is a phantom. Now I'm going to show you a harlequin with very, very heavy tigering, so you see what I'm talking about. Now, this right here is how tiger expresses itself in extreme harlequin geckos. Now, as you can see, when you look at the dorsal pattern, you can see breaks across the dorsal there. That is the tiger patterning at work. And of course, when you look at the laterals, there's breaks in the pattern along her sides right there. So it is easier to see when the gecko is nice and fired up because you see the contrast of the base color. But those breaks where you see base color, that's what the tiger markings are doing. There's always a fight between tigering and pinstriping in which way they're going to orient the pattern. And in this case, this gecko is heavy on tigering and very, very little to no pinstriping, as you can see. This is what pinstriping is. Now right here we have two different variations of the pinstriping, and they are some of my favorite morph combos. On my right hand is a tangerine pinstripe, which obviously described by the saturated orange markings on the dorsal and on the laterals. And on my left hand here is a tricolor white wall pinstripe. Now, the pinstriping refers to the spikes that go from the crests all the way down the back to their tail base. Those raised scales that look like spikes are the pinstripe scales. Now, of course, the coloration is very different, but they're still both harlequin pinstriping. As you can see, they have a base color and then markings on their laterals and on their limbs, which make them harlequin, and they have those pinstripes. So they are harlequin pinstripes, but this one is a tangerine harlequin pinstripe, and this one is a white waller tricolor harlequin pinstripe. The white wall is very interesting because there are various degrees to cream and white pattern. The white wall tends to give them, just as the name implies, a thick layer of white walling on the laterals, and it completely fills in the sides, as you can see with this guy. So when you look at his laterals there, you could see that his sides are completely filled in with that white on both sides, and that is what is a white wall. Now, white walling is very similar looking to the lily whites, which we will cover here in a second, but it is actually not the same thing. They do not act the same way. This is primarily done through selective breeding, while the lily whites are incomplete dominant. So this is my white wall male, and then here is the tangerine. Now the tangerine is a little bit distinct. It is kind of like an enhancer for the orange patterns. Orange pattern geckos typically fade in, 2 or 3 years when they get to adult size. The tangerines tend to hold the color a lot better, and that is why these are the orange marking geckos that I work with. But they are absolutely beautiful, and you can see those saturated laterals on this guy here. So this right here is a variation of the pinstripe mutation, but this is a super empty back. Now there is a empty back, and then there is a super empty back. The super empty back have all the markings from the dorsal completely wiped, and it even wipes out some of the lateral and the limb markings. As you can see with this guy here, he is a dark base, and with the empty backs, you will be able to see the base color on their dorsal, just like this. It is pretty clear when you see a super empty back. Heterozygous or single gene empty backs can be a little bit harder to identify, but with enough practice, you can get pretty good at identifying them. Now, I will say that with every single one of these morphs, if you add other morphs on top of them, they will interact differently, so it might be harder to tell. For the most part, I am showing you guys the best examples of those morphs that I can, so you guys get a pretty good idea and understanding of what these morphs are. This could be considered another variation of the empty backs as well. These are Superstripe crested geckos. Now, the Superstripes are different from the empty backs in that they actually have some cream that borders that emptiness down the dorsal. As you can see on their backs, the gap between the pinstripe scales and the cream is not as wide as it is with the super empty backs. But these are two very good examples of what Superstripes look like. It's the same premise as the empty backs. You could see their base color down the middle of that dorsal there, and that's what makes them a Superstripe. Now you get bonus points if your Superstripes are quad stripes like these two geckos here. This is picture perfect, and this is one of his females. Now this is a perfect example of the variations that can go on within the same